Hey kids, this is Ivan. How you doing? I figured it's time to make another RPG video talking about tabletop role-playing games because, after all, that's how this channel started in the first place. Some time ago, when I was talking to my friends about the Party Caller in the original versions of Dungeons & Dragons, we talked about our experience of learning the game back in the 80s, the early 80s, when, there wasn't the internet, there wasn't a lot of information available for any role-playing games to teach you how to play it. So you were dependent upon being able to read the text and learn it yourself, unless you had an older sibling or some other older friend that was going to get you into the hobby. So we had to read these books. Now, back in the mid 70s, and let's pick 1974, the texts were famously hard to understand and read, and they were obscure. And there's a reason for this. These texts were written by people who never really imagined that these games would become gigantic. And so they assumed that the people that were going to be reading them were like them. They were going to have a wargaming background. They were going to understand a lot of these basic concepts. So they could give you just some of the details of how to do this, assuming you had this bedrock foundation. But a lot of us didn't have that foundation. People like me, well, we didn't have an older brother. Fortunately, I did not start by reading those texts. By 1981, 83, when I started playing, this was out. And so I read this. I think it was 1981, and when I was 13, so I learned to play in one day. This was produced in 1978. The basic, by that time, they had started to realize the importance of being able to write the games in a way that somebody with no concept of how to do this, of role-playing games, could pick this up and read it. So they paid a lot of attention to actually being, explaining everything step by step. I've had these other experiences. My children, while they're in their, just about 30 and in their early 30s. However, my girlfriend Susan's children, Ollie and Avery, they are, early teenagers. And so we sit down and we play games sometimes, and we'll open up a game and it says something like, don't read these rules, scan this QR code, and go watch the video about how to play this game. And then the actual instructions they give you in the game, well, they're not that great because they put a lot of their attention into giving you a video and showing you. In a sense, they're being the older brother, teaching you how to play that particular game. However, I believe there's a big skill and a lot of value in writing down, how do you play this? And yes, I know there's an issue of page count and expense and what have you. But to me, that's really, really valuable. And a lot of role-playing games suffer for not doing that very well. And then you have to sit there and talk to each other. Well, how exactly do you do this? It's funny. As my friends and I were talking, I love to take credit for this observation, but I cannot. My friend Anthony famously says every once in a while, well, D&D kills the conversation. And what he means by that is there are thousands and thousands of role-playing games out there, but it dominates most of the conversation, and people tend to think about concepts in role-playing by filtering it through the how Dungeons & Dragons works. Old edition, new edition doesn't really matter. And so it can kill the conversation because you end up talking about those things. However, what's even more interesting, or at least more germane to this particular topic, is he noticed, he said, the lion's share of videos and things on written forums, written blogs, is about that same game, and a huge amount of it is how to play. How does this rule work? How does this other rule work? And the thought being, well, hey, maybe it's really hard to understand. And having the experience of some years ago now, learning the, not the latest version, I think 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons, and running it for children in the library, even with the Curse of Knowledge, even knowing how things work, it was very difficult to learn how to play that game. It, is one of the reasons that I don't suggest it for new gamers, and especially for children to read, even though it's the most popular or the most visible thing out there, because it's difficult. There are other games that we have that are written really well that you don't see a lot of question and answer about it because you can figure it out. So, at the end of the day, I believe it's very, very important to have a game, or whatever you're writing, to be written in such a way that, a 13-year-old kid can pick it up with no prior knowledge and do it. Imagine this. Imagine that you've got a friend and you're trying to explain the game Monopoly to them. However, they've never played a board game. They have no experience with any of this. They speak your language perfectly, but maybe they're from some remote area where there are no board games. Not as easy as you think. Start thinking about how you would explain this to them. Now, think about how you would give them a set of written instructions on how to play the game Monopoly. Remembering all the time they've never played a board game in any way, shape, or form. Not easy. However, I believe it is essential. It's the kind of writing that belongs in our games, so we don't need to ask questions and can just play them. And I've seen games with good writing, and I've seen games with bad writing. Food for thought. Have a good one, kids.